Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Jake.
And I'm Sara. We're so happy you're here.
Have you ever listened to a native English speaker and thought, their English sounds so natural, fluent, and advanced, but my sentences sound too simple? Maybe you know plenty of English words, but you keep saying things like, I'm happy, it's good, or I like it. There's nothing wrong with those sentences, but they don't always express your ideas as clearly or confidently as you'd like.
That's something almost every English learner experiences. Many people believe they need thousands of advanced vocabulary words to sound fluent. But the truth is, advanced English isn't about using difficult words all the time. It's about learning how to build richer, more natural, and more expressive sentences using the English you already know.
The exciting part is that you don't have to memorize hundreds of complicated grammar rules. Small changes in the way you structure your sentences can completely transform the way your English sounds. With just a few simple techniques, you can turn ordinary sentences into advanced, natural conversations.
In today's episode, we'll show you exactly how to do that. You'll learn how native speakers expand simple ideas, add useful details, connect thoughts smoothly, and make their sentences sound more fluent without making them more complicated.
We'll also practice with plenty of real-life examples. You'll see how an ordinary sentence like, I'm tired, can become something much more natural, such as, I've had a long day, so I'm feeling a little exhausted. By the end of this episode, you'll know how to build stronger, more confident English sentences in everyday conversations.
Whether you're preparing for an interview, speaking with international friends, studying abroad, traveling, or simply trying to become a more confident English speaker, these techniques will help you sound more fluent and more expressive every time you speak.
Ready to take your English from simple to advanced?
Then let's get started.
All right, Sarah. Let's begin with something that surprises a lot of English learners. Advanced English doesn't always mean using advanced vocabulary. Imagine two people talking about their weekend. One person says, I went to the beach. It was nice. The other says, I spent the weekend at the beach and it was exactly what I needed after a busy week. Both sentences are correct, but the second one sounds richer because it gives more information and creates a clearer picture.
That's exactly the difference. Native speakers don't try to impress people with difficult words every time they speak. Instead, they naturally explain their thoughts in more detail. Someone asks, how was your vacation? Instead of saying, it was good, you could say, it was amazing. I finally had a chance to relax, explore new places, and spend time with my family. You're not using complicated grammar, you're simply giving your listener more to imagine.
One of the easiest ways to make your English sound advanced is by answering beyond the question. Imagine someone asks, do you enjoy reading? A basic answer is, yes, I do. A stronger answer sounds more like this. Yes, especially before going to bed, because reading helps me relax after a long day. You're adding a reason, and that small habit immediately makes your English sound more natural and more confident.
I love that technique because it works in almost every conversation. Someone asks, do you drink coffee? Instead of replying, yes, you could say, yes, I usually have a cup every morning because it helps me wake up before work. If someone asks, do you like traveling? You might answer, absolutely. I enjoy visiting new places because I love experiencing different cultures and trying local food. Notice how the conversation suddenly feels much more interesting.
Another habit that makes native speakers sound fluent is connecting their ideas instead of speaking in short, separate sentences. Listen to the difference. I was tired. I went to bed early. That's perfectly correct. But I was so tired that I decided to go to bed early. Flows much more naturally. Words like because, so, although, while, even though, and, instead of help your thoughts connect smoothly.
You hear those connectors everywhere in everyday English. Someone might say, I wanted to go for a walk, but it started raining. Or, although I was nervous, I decided to give the presentation anyway. These aren't difficult sentences, yet they sound much more mature because the ideas are connected. Instead of sounding like separate pieces, your thoughts become one complete story.
Here's another secret. Advanced speakers often make their sentences more specific. Compare these two answers. I bought a car. Now listen to this. I finally bought the car I'd been saving for over a year. Or, instead of saying, I watched a movie, try, I watched a comedy that made me laugh from beginning to end. Those extra details make your English more vivid, more memorable, and much more enjoyable to listen to.
And that's something you can start practicing today. Every time you answer a question, challenge yourself to add one extra piece of information. Mention a reason, describe a feeling, explain the result, or tell a short story. Those tiny additions don't just make your sentences longer, they make them more meaningful. And that's one of the biggest differences between basic English and advanced English.
Sara, here's another habit that instantly makes someone's English sound more advanced. Instead of describing only actions, describe your thoughts and feelings as well. Imagine someone asks, "How was your first day at your new job?" A simple answer is, "It was good." But a more natural answer sounds like, "I was a little nervous at first, but everyone was so welcoming that I started feeling comfortable within an hour." You're helping the listener understand not just what happened, but how you experienced it.
That's exactly how people speak in real conversations. If a friend asks, "How was the concert?" they usually don't want a one-word answer. You could say, "The music was fantastic, the crowd was full of energy, and I honestly didn't want the night to end." If someone asks about a restaurant, instead of saying, "The food was nice," you might say, "Everything was freshly prepared, the service was excellent, and I'd definitely go back again." Those small details make your English sound much more engaging.
Another technique is learning to compare ideas. Native speakers constantly compare the present with the past, one thing with another, or expectations with reality. You might say, "This book is much more interesting than I expected," or "Working from home is very different from working in an office." Even simple comparisons like, "The weather is much warmer today than yesterday," make your conversation sound richer because you're adding perspective instead of stating isolated facts.
That's true. And comparisons naturally appear in everyday life. Someone asks about your new phone, and you answer, "The battery lasts much longer than my old one." A student might say, "This semester is busier than the last one because I'm taking more classes." Or after watching a movie, you could say, "The ending was better than I expected." These expressions are simple, but they're exactly how fluent speakers explain their opinions.
Here's another secret that many learners overlook. Advanced speakers don't rush to answer immediately. They often introduce their opinions naturally. They begin with expressions like, "to be honest," "as far as I'm concerned," "personally," or "from my experience." Imagine someone asks, "What's the best way to learn English?" Starting with, "Personally, I think consistency is more important than studying for hours once a week," sounds much more natural than jumping straight into the answer.
I love those expressions because they make conversations feel warmer and more personal. If someone asks, "Do you enjoy cooking?" you could begin with, "Honestly, I've only started enjoying it recently." When discussing travel, you might say, "From my experience, traveling by train is much more relaxing than flying." These small introductions make your speech sound thoughtful, and they also give your brain an extra second to organize the rest of your sentence.
One more thing that makes English sound advanced is adding results or consequences. Instead of saying, "I studied every day," you could say, "I studied every day, so I felt much more confident during the exam." Rather than saying, "I started exercising," try, "I started exercising regularly, and now I have much more energy throughout the day." You're not just telling people what happened, you're explaining why it mattered, and that's what keeps conversations interesting.
If you pay attention to native speakers, you'll notice they rarely stop after the main idea. They almost always add something extra, a reason, a comparison, a feeling, or a result. That's exactly what makes their English sound fluent and expressive. So the next time you answer a question, don't stop at the first sentence. Ask yourself, What else can I add? That one simple habit can completely transform the way you speak English.
Sarah, there's another habit that separates advanced speakers from beginners. They don't just answer questions, they paint a picture. Imagine someone asks, "Where do you live?" Instead of saying, "I live in Mumbai," you could say, "I live in Mumbai," which is one of the busiest cities in India, so there's always something happening around me. Now the listener can actually imagine your life. Advanced English often comes from giving your listener a clearer picture, not from using bigger words.
That's such a great point. The same thing happens when people talk about their hobbies. Saying, "I like photography" is perfectly fine, but "I enjoy photography because it allows me to capture beautiful moments whenever I travel" sounds much more natural. If someone asks about your favorite season, you could say, "I love autumn because the weather is comfortable, the colors are beautiful, and it's perfect for long walks." You're simply sharing your experience, and that's what makes your English more engaging.
Another technique is using examples naturally while you're speaking. Suppose someone asks, "What do you usually do on weekends?" Instead of giving a short list, you could say, "It depends on my mood. Sometimes I go hiking with friends, sometimes I stay home and watch documentaries, and occasionally I spend the whole afternoon reading a good book." Notice how that answer feels like a real conversation. You're allowing the listener to see different parts of your life instead of giving a single fact.
That's exactly how conversations grow naturally. Someone asks, "What kind of music do you enjoy?" Rather than answering, "I like pop music," you might say, "I listen to different kinds of music depending on what I'm doing. I usually play relaxing music while I'm working, but when I'm exercising, I prefer something much more energetic." That answer feels personal because it connects music to everyday life. People remember stories and experiences much more than simple facts.
Let's talk about another powerful habit: anticipating the listener's next question. Imagine someone tells you, "I recently started learning to cook." A fluent speaker often adds, "At first it was difficult, but after watching a few online videos, I became much more confident." They answer the question and then continue with information the listener is probably curious about. That's one of the reasons conversations with native speakers flow so smoothly. They don't wait to be asked every small detail.
That's something we all do in our native language without even realizing it. If someone asks, "How was your vacation?" we naturally explain where we went, who we traveled with, what we enjoyed most, and maybe even something funny that happened. We don't stop after saying, "It was great." Bringing that same habit into English instantly makes your conversations sound richer and more natural. The goal isn't to speak longer, it's to speak more completely.
Here's one final technique that I think every learner should practice. Instead of memorizing individual sentences, memorize conversation patterns. Learn patterns like, "The reason I enjoy it is," "One thing I've noticed is," "What I like most about it is," or "The biggest challenge was." Once those patterns become automatic, you can use them to talk about almost any topic. It's like having a set of building blocks that help you create advanced sentences without thinking too much about grammar.
And that's exactly why fluent speakers seem so confident. They're not inventing every sentence from the beginning. They're using familiar patterns and filling them with new ideas depending on the situation. Once you start collecting these patterns and using them in everyday conversations, you'll notice that your English becomes smoother, more expressive, and much easier to understand. That's when you'll realize that speaking advanced English is less about knowing difficult words and more about expressing simple ideas in a richer, more natural way.
Sarah, there's one technique that I think is completely underrated, and that's learning to qualify your statements. Instead of making everything sound absolute, native speakers often soften or strengthen their ideas naturally. Rather than saying, "This restaurant is expensive," they might say, "It's a bit more expensive than most places, but the food is definitely worth it." Or, instead of saying, "I'm busy," they'll say, "I've been quite busy lately because I've been working on a new project." These small adjustments make your English sound much more thoughtful and sophisticated.
I completely agree. Think about everyday conversations at work. A colleague asks, "How's your week going?" Instead of answering, "It's stressful," you could say, "It's been a little hectic, but I'm making good progress on everything." Someone asks about learning English, and rather than saying, "It's difficult," you might say, "It's definitely challenging at times, but it's becoming much easier now that I'm practicing every day." Those little details create a much more balanced and natural response.
Another thing advanced speakers do really well is explaining cause and effect. They don't just tell you what happened, they explain why it happened and what happened afterward. Imagine saying, "I missed the bus." That's fine, but I missed the bus because I left home 10 minutes late, so I ended up taking a taxi to work. Sounds like real conversation. The listener can easily follow the story because every idea connects to the next one.
That's exactly why storytelling becomes so engaging. Someone asks, "Why did you start learning English?" You could simply answer, "For my job." But a richer answer sounds more like, "I started learning English because my company began working with international clients, and I realized it would open up many more opportunities for me." Now your answer has a reason, a purpose, and a result. That's how people naturally explain important decisions in everyday life.
Here's another habit I'd encourage everyone to develop. Start replacing very common adjectives with more descriptive expressions. Instead of saying, "The movie was good," you could say, "The movie was surprisingly entertaining." Rather than, "The meeting was bad," try, "The meeting was quite unproductive." Instead of, "I'm happy," you might say, "I'm really pleased with how everything turned out." You don't need difficult vocabulary, just slightly more precise words that match the situation.
And remember, context always matters. Imagine a friend asks about your vacation. Instead of saying, "The hotel was nice," you could say, "The hotel was comfortable, the staff were incredibly friendly, and the view from our room was absolutely beautiful." Someone asks about a book you've just finished, and you reply, "It was so interesting that I finished it in 2 days." You're giving the listener enough detail to understand exactly why you feel that way.
One final piece of advice is to become curious about how native speakers actually express ideas. When you're watching a movie, listening to a podcast, or reading an article, don't only notice new words. Pay attention to complete sentences. Notice how people give opinions, explain experiences, tell stories, disagree politely, or describe emotions. Every complete sentence you collect becomes another pattern your brain can use in future conversations.
That's one of the fastest ways to sound more advanced. Fluency isn't built by memorizing hundreds of random words. It's built by collecting useful expressions, meaningful sentence patterns, and real conversations that you can adapt to your own life. Every time you hear a sentence that feels natural, ask yourself, could I use this when talking about my own experiences? If the answer is yes, practice it until it becomes part of your everyday English.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode on how to make advanced sentences in English. We hope you've discovered that sounding fluent isn't about using long, complicated words. It's about expressing your ideas clearly, adding meaningful details, connecting your thoughts naturally, and making your conversations more interesting. Those small improvements are what make a huge difference in the way your English sounds.
Today we learned that advanced English is really about communication, not complexity. We talked about expanding simple answers, giving reasons, connecting ideas with natural linking words, using comparisons, expressing opinions, adding emotions, telling short stories, and building complete thoughts instead of isolated sentences. These are exactly the habits that make native speakers sound fluent in everyday conversations. The best part is that you can start using every one of these techniques today.
Before we finish, here's a challenge for you. Choose 5 simple sentences that you use all the time, like "I'm tired," "I like coffee," "I went shopping," "I'm busy," or "The movie was good." Now try to improve each one by adding a reason, a feeling, a comparison, or an extra detail. Instead of saying, "I'm busy," you might say, "I've been quite busy this week because I'm preparing for an important presentation." Do this every day, and you'll quickly notice that your English starts sounding much richer and more natural.
Here's another exercise that works incredibly well. At the end of each day, spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about what happened. Don't stop after one sentence. Challenge yourself to explain what you did, why you did it, how you felt, what happened next, and what you learned from the experience. The goal isn't to speak longer. The goal is to develop the habit of expressing complete ideas instead of short answers.
If you found today's episode helpful, we'd really appreciate it if you could give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who's working on becoming a more confident English speaker. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss our upcoming podcast episodes. We'll continue bringing you practical speaking techniques, real-life conversations, and simple habits that help you sound more natural and more fluent every single day.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. We're truly grateful to be part of your English learning journey, and we hope every episode gives you practical skills that you can use immediately. Remember, advanced English isn't about trying to sound intelligent. It's about expressing simple ideas with confidence, clarity, and personality. That's what makes people enjoy talking with you.
Until next time, keep practicing.
Keep speaking.
And remember, advanced English isn't about using bigger words. It's about expressing bigger ideas. Keep learning, keep speaking, and let every conversation make you a more confident English speaker. We'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.